morning, everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. It is Wednesday. Hey, it's been a crazy week. I wonder how it's been for you. Thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday to be with us. I trust you've got a cup of coffee and you settled in to hear a really great presentation this morning. I have to say it's the second time I'm listening to it, and it's really great. I really appreciate Jane's sense of humor, but I also appreciate her sharing some very practical advice with us. So let's get going and let's make sure that we're all on the same page. It's great to have you with us, and because it's a relatively small group this morning, I'm hoping we're going to have a lot of interaction. I'd love to hear your experiences as well, because I know that it's been a very trying time for many of you, having to work as essential workers from day one of lockdown, and having to deal with the real aspects of the pandemic on a day-to-day basis while I'm hiding in my home office. So I'm really grateful for all the work that you've been doing, because it means we've got food on the shelves. In relation to the webinar that we're going to be doing today, let's just go through some basic rules. Okay, so you should be hearing me loud and clear. If not, can someone please wave at me? So you've got a chat bar and a question bar, so won't you please go ahead and let me know if there is any problems on your side, and I'll try and help you to resolve those. Just to make sure that you can see everything, you can maximize. Please make a note of your questions, because although unfortunately Jane isn't live with us today due to some personal circumstances, she's definitely available to chat to you about their ideas and their suggestions and the things that they've implemented. In fact, she was wanting to talk more, so she's very generous with her knowledge, and she doesn't see this as anything competitive. So that's really great, and we are obviously recording today, so we will be using her recording, and hopefully cross all fingers that this works, because it's the first time we've done it with a recorded presentation, so I'm really hoping that it all works out okay. If not, I will make sure that you get the recording later today. So who is our distinguished speaker? Well, this is Jane Nock, and she is the Chief Food Science Technical Officer at In2 Foods. And for those of you that know the business, you know that they deal with lots and lots of high-risk, ready-to-eat products on a day-to-day basis. They're brave enough to ship fruit salad around the world, and they get up to some really interesting things in their facilities. And so I note with interest that we've got a couple of people that are in the same kind of environment, and so it's cool to have you with us from that perspective. I know that the interest and the controls that you have in place in high-risk facilities are quite specific. So please make sure that you let us know how things are going on your side too, because we will definitely have an opportunity to have a bit of a conversation today. So don't run away, don't be shy. I'll let you speak, and you'll be able to share your experiences as well. That'll be really cool to hear how you found dealing with the pandemic. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Jane. So I'm hoping you guys are crossing your fingers and your toes as I now hand over to her for the presentation, and then I'll come back online after that, and we will then have a conversation and hopefully share some questions. So don't go anywhere while I do the technical stuff on my side, and yeah, as I said, hold all fingers so that I make sure that I've got the right thing coming through to you, and we can share the right information. So just give me a few minutes as I locate the correct file, and then we'll go into the presentation. Thanks, guys. Nice having you today.
Hi, my name is Jane Nock. I'm the Chief Technical Food Science Officer for In2Food. In2Food is a large food and drink manufacturer with 11 factories supplying over 1,500 products across a wide range of product categories such as ready to eat, ready to reheat, ready to cook, into a major retailer. We also export ready-to-eat products and other ingredients into the UK, and we currently employ approximately 8,000 colleagues. I recently gave the original presentation, Going Over the Top, at the Food Safety Summit. As now looking back, it felt like we were at war. We were stuck in the trenches. We couldn't see the enemy COVID-19, but we knew it was out there. We didn't know who was going to get struck down first or when it was going to come, and how on earth were we going to get out of it alive. What was the plan? We really knew nothing at all. To me, I felt like I was in the very last episode of the well-known British TV comedy Blackadder. So I apologise if you don't know it, but from the references and the photos in these simple slides accompanying this talk, I do hope you appreciate the irony. And I'm also going to talk about where we are now, a year on. What have we learned? So looking back, no amount of careful planning without crisis and business continuity, our tacit plans could have prepared for us for what we had to deal with back then. As a business, I truly thought we had a great plan. Through our horizon scanning, we thought prepared and had been preparing for the worst. We'd pre-ordered our digital infrared thermometers from overseas, but they got delayed when the world stopped flying. We'd ordered enough soap and sanitizer, plus 2 cloth masks for all 8,000 colleagues to take home. We'd ensured we'd procured and held enough stock for 6 months, just in case. We had contingency in our operational flexibility and had arranged different factories to produce different products if needed through factory closures or lack of colleagues. But what we weren't prepared for back then was the panic buying and the product demand that the initial uplift in volume gave, which was absolutely enormous. It almost doubled the demand we would produce for Christmas. This meant we needed extra people to manufacture it, when the people were our biggest risk. So no amount of planning and contingency could have prepared us for what actually happened then. In truth, a year ago, our plan wasn't worth the paper it was written on. However, in the second wave, I'm glad to say we were all a lot calmer. Our operational flexibility plans were in place and robust, and although we didn't need them, they were there. We only held a little extra stock, but mostly of all imported products. There was no mad panic buying. We as consumers are all turning more and more to shopping online. However, the shopping online and the new pop-up shops, particularly selling food, can create another food safety risk, as there's currently no regulations. Anyone with a Facebook page or Instagram account can offer you cooked, frozen food, etc. that fundamentally may be made out of people's kitchens and delivered to you in an unrefrigerated car. These businesses fall outside the current scope of our regulations and registrations. But I do hope it's a topic that I'm sure in future months our government and the Consumer Council will lead the way to rectify. What I can tell you about our cunning plan was that the crisis team met every day back then. We'd just get our updated procedures out and then the orders would change. But we made sure we over-communicated at all time and briefed our colleagues then every single day. Fundamentally, the food industry is actually in a much better place than many other industries. We already have good food manufacturing practices. Together with high personal hygiene practices, we already use personal protective clothing and disposable PPE. The only exception back then was we did not have the masks or social distancing. Now we have just elevated and expedited the additional standards to a new higher level that we would have never ever considered, but we will keep them there. I personally cannot see in the near future that masks in the workplace, particularly where there are a large number of people, like in food manufacturing businesses, will be removed from the health and safety regulations. Disposable masks are still extremely expensive, and I think will also remain that way. So it's worth investigating alternative solutions, particularly for captive high care or high risk areas. I've spent most of my career in the food industry, writing policies and procedures to protect the food from people and not protect the people from each other. The health and safety of our colleagues is extremely important. And at the start, we increased our occupational health practitioners and nurses from a weekly visit to being on site every single day. This truly made a difference to our colleagues' daily lives. It kept our people at work and reassured them if they only had a cold. And we have kept them in place. It has definitely brought down our sickness absenteeism over the last year. I learned back then not to underestimate that our colleagues wanted to help make a difference. The innovation and adaptability that came from them was absolutely incredible. They came up with practical ways to measure each other's temperatures in the absence of the infrared thermometers. They used buffs in the absence of masks. They used themselves to measure out the 1.5 metres for social distancing. They also organised and arranged themselves in segregated zones so that if one of them should get sick, they could limit the exposure to the other colleagues. They also arranged where they sat at lunch, which teams queued up to go through the change rooms first. What I am proud to say, and they still do this today, is they embrace one of our key values: change is our friend. And it's normally everyday practice now. So when the second wave come, we just carried on as normal. It's business as usual. Cleaning and sanitising is part of our everyday operation, and the only difference back then for the start of COVID-19 was that we were required to do a deep clean. So to stop our factories from shutting, I reverted to implementing our good old-fashioned pathogen cleaning protocol that we would normally just implement for environmental pathogen hotspots, but this included fogging. There's lots of evidence in fogging's limitations that I know of, but I'm not going to cover those. Having used fogging for many years and in the absence of a practical solution or guidance from the government, we just used to complete fogging at the end of each shift. I have since investigated several new products that were quick to come to the market and other things that have been around for a while, such as UV, that were claiming to be effective, but they're just not practical for our factory spaces because they're very large. But they are practical for smaller spaces such as offices. So we continue to fog. It's very effective and affordable. It also back then reassured our colleagues we'd gone the extra mile, giving them an extra sanitising step. It was and still is at a minimal extra cost. Plus, we get the added benefit of its effectiveness in managing our environment. But more importantly, back then, it kept our factories open when the positives started. And they did. The worst thing for me a year ago was waiting in that trench, to go over the top and enter into no man's land. Who was going to be that first positive colleague? Which site was it going to be at? Had I put the best plan in place? Were we going to get shut down? And with the ever-changing rules, just trying to keep up with the changes and communicate to everyone. Then that wait is over. It starts. And in typical fashion for us, it was confirmed late on a Friday afternoon. But we had our cunning plan, who, what, why, when. We had our checklist record ready to notify and provide the correct information to the Department of Health and Department of Labour. But there had been no guidance issued from the government yet. Do we stop and wait or carry on producing? What should we do? The government communication was as clear as mud. And have you ever tried getting hold of the Department of Health or the Department of Labour late on a Friday afternoon? Well, thankfully, the Western Cape Department of Health were invaluable, practical and very helpful. And the doctor always answered me no matter what time of day it was. And he still does today when I have the odd query. The worst thing is you cannot prepare yourself for how people are going to react. No amount of communication or training helped. Because when reality hits and you inform them that one of their colleagues has COVID-19, their only thoughts and questions are, or were, are we going to die? And especially as many of our colleagues and their families might have comorbidities, then it's a different story. That no man's land is brutal. The first time I attended a positive COVID-19 meeting, we held them all in an area and tried to calmly tell them that one of their colleagues had turned out to be positive. The crying and the wailing started. I could not physically comfort them. It truly broke my heart. They weren't worried for themselves, but for their families. And after that, we ensured our occupational health practitioner was present every single time we briefed another positive COVID case, just for psychological support. I truly think it helped. I needed it. We were proactive before we had positive cases, and I'd invited the Department of Health and the Department of Labour officials to our factories to show them what we had put in place and would do when our first case hit. So when that D-Day arrived and the invasion of COVID-19 started, we were lucky our Department of Health just popped in to check and sign off our cleaning, and the area was only shut down for 1 hour. But what we were prepared for then was the overzealous police chiefs and majors coming very late at night to try and shut our factory down. But we just showed them that we had been inspected and clearly displayed our reports in reception, and then they went away. My personal opinion was back then, I think we were all scared. None of us knew what was going on, especially in the early days, and there was no clear guidance or training or information. I'm glad to say now, though, because of the valuable information that's distributed and the training that they've been given, we have not been raided again, but we have made sure that we still have everything in place. In the first wave, our Western Cape factories were where we saw most of our positive cases. But one of the key differences that we wanted to do was not to present a stigma around those people that were positive and then coming back to work. So we ensure we celebrated when they returned to work. The second wave, however, although we've seen a few cases in the Western Cape factories, the majority of positives were in our Gauteng area. And although I'm glad to report in line with the national figures that we have seen a significant decrease over the past weeks, we have unfortunately had one colleague tragically pass away. I do not think there's any of us who haven't been touched by COVID-19 in one way or another. We may have had it, we may know one of our family or friends or colleagues that's had it, but thankfully there's hope. The vaccines are here. Like those scientists who have also worked tirelessly to help us and don't often get a mention. I'd like to thank them from me. IT technology for effective communication has become a key part of our everyday lives now. We have learned how to use Teams and Google Meetings, Zoom. It's business as usual. We just needed to embrace technology in more ways so that we can work better and it's not going to be a new way of working. It's just different. Take third-party accreditation audits, customer or supplier visits. They still back then wanted to physically come to our sites to audit, but we have learned that desktop audits can work with a little ingenuity. It might take a bit longer, especially for those of us of a certain age, including myself with technology, but we have this little thing called a cell phone, which can take videos or WhatsApp calls, and we can actually show people in real time. I'm still waiting for my Google glasses. I still think that they're part of the future. But until such time that they can come to South Africa, my cell phone does just nicely. And just because we want to keep our people safe and have not had auditors in the factory, doesn't mean that the factories will stop maintaining the highest standards. So how can we carry on and use this technology and ways of working in the future? Because during the second wave, as a precaution, I have locked down our factories again from visitors and auditors in the hope to stop the continued spread of the new variants. So what I can tell you, because we have learnt how to do Teams and desktop audits, we're not afraid anymore to try new technology. I have not been met with the same resistance like I was at the beginning of last year. We know there are new ways of working. We just need to manage them by exception and learn how to do things differently. I was and still am only too happy to share what In2Food has put in place. I have spoke to many people I've not met before, not even from our own industry, from all across the world. I've helped and shared where I can. I do hope our scientific community remains resilient in continuing to collaborate and share, just like this webinar. So thank you, Linda. As a food scientist, I believe imparting our knowledge and experience is a gift. It's not a commodity. It's not about a competitive edge. Well, that's my philosophy anyway. What I have made reference on this slide is a photo of thousands of troops lined up in regiments to take their turns to leave the shores of France and retreat on the embarkation from Dunkirk back to the UK. Some never made it, but thousands did. So that gives us all hope. We will all take our turn in a queue and line up to take our vaccine. I can't wait. I can honestly say that at the start of COVID-19 last year, I thought I'd go mad sometimes, with the ever-changing orders, writing and the rewriting of procedures. So unfortunately, I could not see my CEO letting me get off the hook from leading our COVID-19 crisis, then or now, with me putting a large pair of underpants over my head and sticking 2 pencils up my nose to avoid leading us. Blackadder really had no choice but to lead his men out of the trenches and go over the top into no man's land. So in the last presentation I made, I gave reference to the second wave of infection approaching us, and I used Blackadder's last words as he went over the top, which was "good luck, everyone." However, there is hope for the future. The vaccines arrived at our shores, the infection rates are down, and our President has lifted some of our restrictions. And whilst we may not have lots to celebrate, we must not drop the ball. We must embed what we have learned and continue to incorporate our new ways of working into everyday good GMP practices. Thankfully now, I don't feel like Blackadder, a leader in crisis. I feel like a leader who can lead his men over the top into no man's land with hope. It's not quite yet a pretty poppy field, but I am truly very optimistic and hopeful now. The one thing I can say about COVID-19 as a food scientist, it has taught me to be more agile, adapt quickly, not to procrastinate, waiting for facts that may never come, but to think outside the box. So I'll end on a quote from Michelangelo, aged 87. "I am still learning." Are you? Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you, Jane. I think those are very, very encouraging and inspiring words, and I think it's good to at least appreciate the fact that we are all in the same boat. Hopefully the boat is the one that's not going to sink, but we are all in the same boat and we are sharing some of these experiences together, and we will look back and we will marvel at what we have learnt in the last 18 months. And I completely appreciate what you've said about going forward in just a different way. The new normal is not as scary as it was, and hopefully there's many, many opportunities for improvements, and also many, many opportunities for us to embrace new and better ways of doing things.